I never understood why my grandfather refused to celebrate Victory Day. Every year, when the entire neighborhood would hang flags and gather for parades, he'd retreat to his workshop in the garage, tools in hand, working on whatever project kept his mind occupied. My name is Thomas Reynolds, and for most of my 28 years I accepted this as just another quirk of the old man who raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 7. Growing up in Richmond, Virginia, I'd watch other veterans march proudly down Monument Avenue, their uniforms decorated with medals, their faces beaming with justified pride. But not Grandpa Robert. He kept his uniform locked away in a trunk in the attic, buried under old blankets and forgotten Christmas decorations. The only reason I even knew he'd served was because my grandmother mentioned it once before she passed when I was 15. It was a humid May morning in 2019 when everything changed. I'd just finished my tour with the Marines, serving 4 years that included a deployment to the Middle East. The experience had left me with questions I couldn't answer alone, and somehow I knew Grandpa Robert held the keys to understanding the weight I carried home with me. He was 73 that spring, his hair completely silver now, but his hands still steady as they gripped his coffee mug on the back porch. The morning sun filtered through the old oak trees, casting shadows across his weathered face. I'd driven 3 hours from my apartment in Norfolk to see him, carrying a duffel bag full of clean laundry and a heart full of unspoken burdens. "Grandpa," I started, settling into the wooden chair beside him, "I need to talk to you about something." He didn't look at me immediately, his blue eyes fixed on the garden where tomato plants were just beginning to show their first green shoots. "I figured you'd come around eventually, Tommy. You've got that look your daddy had when he came back from Desert Storm." The comparison stung because I barely remembered my father's face without looking at photographs. "It's about the war, my war. I thought coming home would feel different, you know. Everyone thanks me for my service, throws these welcome home parties, but something feels wrong about celebrating." Robert took a slow sip of his coffee, and I noticed how his hands trembled slightly, a detail I'd never paid attention to before. "You ever wonder why I don't go to those Victory Day parades, son? Every year since I was old enough to understand what they meant." He set his mug down on the small table between us, the ceramic making a soft clink against the wood. "I served in Vietnam, arrived in country in January 1968, just in time for the Tet Offensive. I was 19 years old, fresh out of basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, thinking I was going to be a hero like the men who fought in World War II. This was the most he'd ever said about his service. I leaned forward, afraid that if I moved too quickly, he'd stop talking and retreat back into his decades-long silence. My unit was stationed near Hue City when everything went to hell. We were part of the relief force sent in to retake the city from the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong. The fighting lasted for weeks, Tommy. 26 days of house-to-house combat, watching boys I'd trained with die in streets whose names I couldn't pronounce. The morning birds continued their songs in the trees above us, indifferent to the weight of the words being spoken. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it the sweet scent of honeysuckle from the neighbor's fence. There was this one kid in my platoon, Danny Martinez from El Paso, Texas. Couldn't have been more than 18, always talking about his girlfriend back home, showing everyone the letters she'd send. He carried her photograph in his helmet, tucked inside the band. We'd been fighting for 12 straight days when we got pinned down by sniper fire in what used to be someone's family home. Robert's voice had taken on a distant quality, as if he was no longer sitting on his porch in Virginia, but back in that destroyed house halfway around the world more than 50 years ago. The building was barely standing, walls blown out, roof collapsed in places. We could hear the sniper's rounds pinging off the rubble every time one of us tried to move. Danny was hit trying to reach a better position. The bullet caught him in the leg, femoral artery. I knew we had maybe 3 minutes before he'd bleed out. I found myself holding my breath, my own memories of combat surfacing unbidden. The smell of gunpowder and dust, the weight of gear soaked with sweat, the sound of radio chatter crackling with urgency. I crawled across 20 feet of broken concrete and glass to reach him, applying a tourniquet while the sniper kept firing. My sergeant, a guy named William Hayes from Ohio, he laid down covering fire with 2 other guys from our squad. We managed to drag Danny back to a position where the medevac helicopter could reach him. He survived that day, lost his leg, but made it home. Robert picked up his coffee again but didn't drink, just held it like he needed something solid to anchor him to the present. 3 days later, Sergeant Hayes was killed by a mortar round. Didn't even hear it coming. 1 second he was checking the perimeter, Next second, he was gone, just like that. The best leader I ever served under, a father of 2 girls back in Cleveland, and he died in a muddy street 6,000 miles from home. The weight of his words settled over us like morning fog. I understood now, in a way I hadn't before I deployed myself, why some memories refused to be celebrated. The conversation on the porch had opened a door that had been locked for decades, and over the following weeks I found myself driving to Richmond every weekend. Each visit revealed another layer of my grandfather's story, pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. It was early June when he invited me into the attic for the first time in years. The wooden stairs creaked under our weight as we climbed, and the air up there was thick with heat and the musty smell of old memories. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, labeled in my grandmother's neat handwriting, Christmas ornaments, Tommy's baby clothes, Robert's army things. That last box was what we'd come for. He pulled it from under a pile of winter blankets, and I helped him carry it down to his den, a small room off the main hallway where he kept his books and his father's old record player. "I haven't opened this in probably 15 years, he said, cutting through the packing tape with a pocket knife. "Your grandmother used to ask me to, especially after they started having those big Memorial Day celebrations downtown. She never pushed too hard, though. She understood." Inside the box, carefully wrapped in plastic, was his uniform. The fabric was still in good condition, the patches and insignia exactly as they'd been the day he'd packed them away. Beneath the uniform were stacks of letters, photographs, and a small wooden box I didn't recognize. He lifted out the photographs first, spreading them across his desk. Young men stared back at us, their faces impossibly youthful, dressed in jungle fatigues, holding rifles, often with their arms around each other's shoulders. They were smiling in some photos, exhausted in others, but always there was a bond visible in how they stood close together, brothers forged in circumstances most people would never understand. "That's Danny," Robert said, pointing to a Hispanic kid with a bright smile and kind eyes. "And that's Sergeant Hayes. This one here is Marcus Johnson from Detroit, radio operator. Saved our lives more times than I can count by calling in air support when we needed it most. And this is James Chen, our medic. Kid was barely 20 and handled casualties like a surgeon twice his age." I studied each face, committing them to memory, understanding that these men were the ghosts that haunted my grandfather's silences. Did they all make it home? Some did. Marcus Johnson made it back, worked for the Postal Service for 30 years. James Chen became a doctor in San Francisco, specialized in emergency medicine. But we lost 9 men from our platoon before our tour ended. 9 boys who should have grown old, should have had families and careers and grandkids of their own. He opened the small wooden box, revealing a collection of medals and ribbons I'd never known existed. A Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, various campaign and service medals, objects that should have been displayed with pride, but instead had been hidden away like shameful secrets. "The Army wanted to give me a Silver Star for what happened at Hugh," he said quietly. "I refused it, told them I didn't want any recognition for surviving when better men than me didn't make it home. They gave me the Bronze Star instead, said I didn't have a choice about that one." The air conditioning hummed in the background, a modern comfort far removed from the jungle heat his memories inhabited. Outside, a lawnmower started up somewhere down the street, the normal sounds of suburban American life continuing their eternal cycle. After the war ended and we all came home, there weren't any parades for us, Tommy. People didn't want to think about Vietnam. We were supposed to just go back to normal life, pretend like none of it had happened. I tried. Got a job at the shipyard, married your grandmother, raised your daddy. But every Victory Day, every Memorial Day, every 4th of July, all I could think about was the guys who didn't come home. He pulled out a letter yellowed with age, the handwriting feminine and neat. This came to me in 1972, 4 years after I got back. It was from Sergeant Hayes's widow, Margaret. She'd found my address somehow, wanted to thank me for being there when it happened, for making sure his body got home for burial. She included a photograph of his daughters, twins, said they were starting kindergarten that year. I took the letter carefully, reading words written by a woman I'd never meet, thanking my grandfather for a kindness shown in the midst of hell. The photograph showed 2 identical little girls with their father's smile, dressed in matching dresses, completely unaware that their daddy had died a hero in a war most people wanted to forget. "I couldn't celebrate after that," Robert continued. "How could I put on a happy face and wave a flag when I knew Margaret was raising those girls alone? When I knew Danny Martinez was learning to walk again with a prosthetic leg? when I knew that Marcus Johnson woke up screaming from nightmares just like I did. Victory Day became a reminder of everything we'd lost, not what we'd won. The understanding that had been building in me since that first morning conversation crystallized into something clear and painful. I'd come home from my deployment expecting to feel proud, expecting the gratitude and recognition to somehow validate the experience. But instead, like my grandfather, I felt the absence of the men who hadn't come home. I felt the weight of survival when others hadn't been so fortunate. I lost 2 men from my platoon in Afghanistan, I said, my voice rough. Rodriguez and Jackson. Rodriguez was hit by an IED while we were on patrol outside Kandahar. Jackson took a sniper round during a firefight near the Pakistani border. We had a memorial service for them at the base, folded flags, speeches about honor and sacrifice. But when I came home and everyone wanted to celebrate, all I could think about was their families, about their kids growing up without fathers. Robert reached across the desk and gripped my shoulder, his hand strong despite his age. "That's why you're here, isn't it? That's why you came looking for answers." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The guilt of surviving doesn't go away, Tommy, but over the years I learned something important from a veteran I met at the VA hospital. He was a World War II guy, fought in the Pacific. He told me that the best way to honor the men who didn't make it home wasn't to hide from the celebrations or feel guilty for being alive. It was to live a life they'd be proud of, to be there for other veterans who were struggling, to make sure their sacrifice meant something by being better men ourselves. By mid-July, the conversations with my grandfather had evolved into something more than just shared memories. He'd introduced me to his VA support group, a collection of veterans from different wars who met every Thursday evening at the community center downtown. At first I'd resisted, uncomfortable with the idea of sitting in a circle sharing feelings like some kind of therapy session, but Robert had insisted, and I'd learned long ago that when he used that particular tone of voice, arguing was pointless. The community center was an old brick building on Grove Avenue, renovated in the 1990s, but still retaining its historical charm. The meeting room was on the 2nd floor, accessible by a wide staircase with a railing my grandfather gripped carefully as we climbed. His arthritis had been acting up more frequently, though he'd never admit it bothered him. 8 men were already seated when we arrived, ranging in age from their late 20s to early 80s. The facilitator was a woman named Carol Henderson, a VA counselor who'd been running the group for 12 years. She had a kind face and patient eyes, the sort of person who'd learned to listen without judgment. "Robert, good to see you," she said warmly. "And this must be Tommy. Your grandfather's told us a lot about you." I shook her hand, feeling suddenly exposed, wondering what exactly he'd shared. The other men nodded in greeting, a brotherhood built on shared understanding rather than words. I recognized the look in their eyes, the same one I saw in the mirror some mornings. We took our seats in the circle, and Carol began the session with the same question she always asked: "Who needs to talk today?" An older black man raised his hand, someone Robert later identified as Leonard Washington, a Korean War veteran. "I've been having the dreams again, same ones I had 50 years ago. My wife doesn't understand why I wake up shouting at 2 in the morning." Around the circle, heads nodded in recognition. No one looked surprised or uncomfortable. This was their safe space, the place where nightmares were expected and understood. "I've been there," Leonard said, a younger guy, probably mid-30s, with a prosthetic leg visible below his shorts. His name was David Sullivan, and he'd lost his leg in Iraq in 2007. "After I came home, my girlfriend at the time kept asking why I couldn't just get over it. She didn't get that you don't just get over watching your best friend die." The conversation flowed naturally, each man sharing as much or as little as he wanted. No one was forced to speak, but the invitation was always there. When it came to my turn, I hesitated, unsure how to articulate what I'd been feeling. "I'm Thomas Reynolds," I started. "Marines deployed to Afghanistan in 2017. I've been home for a few months now, and everyone keeps thanking me for my service, saying how proud they are. But I don't feel proud. I feel guilty for making it home when Rodriguez and Jackson didn't." Robert's hand found my shoulder again, that same steady pressure I'd felt in his den. "Tell them about Victory Day," he said quietly. So I did. I explained my confusion about the celebrations, about how watching other people wave flags and cheer felt wrong somehow, like I was betraying the memory of fallen brothers by participating in the joy. I talked about the nightmares, about the way loud noises still made me flinch, about feeling disconnected from civilian life despite being desperate to reconnect. "You're feeling survivor's guilt," Carol said, not as a diagnosis, but as a simple statement of fact. It's one of the most common experiences veterans face, especially those who've lost friends in combat. The important thing to understand is that your survival wasn't a betrayal. Their sacrifice wasn't negated because you came home. But how do you live with it? I asked. How do you celebrate anything when you know what it cost? Leonard Washington leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped between his knees. You don't celebrate the war, son. You celebrate the peace. You celebrate being alive and having the chance to make something of that life. That's what our brothers died for, not for us to spend the rest of our lives feeling guilty. David Sullivan added, I struggled with that for years after I lost my leg. Kept thinking it should have been me who died instead of Thompson, because he had a wife and a baby on the way, and I was just a single guy with no ties. But my therapist helped me understand that survival isn't a competition. We don't get to choose who makes it home. All we can do is honor their memory by living lives worth living. The session continued for another hour, stories and advice flowing between men who'd seen different wars but shared the same essential experience. As we filed out afterward, several veterans approached me, offering phone numbers and invitations to coffee, building the support network that Carol insisted was crucial to healing. Robert and I drove home in comfortable silence, the summer evening settling over Richmond with golden light and the promise of a thunderstorm on the horizon. When we pulled into his driveway, he didn't immediately get out of the truck. I started going to that group 15 years ago, he said, staring at the house he'd lived in for 45 years. Your grandmother had just died, and I was drowning in memories I'd kept buried for decades. Carol saved my life, Tommy. Not in the dramatic way Sergeant Hayes saved mine in Vietnam, but just as surely. She taught me that talking about it wasn't weakness, it was survival. Why didn't you go sooner? I asked. Pride, stubbornness, fear, take your pick. I spent 30 years thinking I had to carry it all alone, that admitting I was struggling somehow diminished the sacrifices my brothers made. But isolation doesn't honor anyone. It just creates more casualties, slower ones that don't show up in the official counts. We got out of the truck and walked to the porch, where moths had already begun gathering around the light fixture. Robert pulled out his keys, then paused before unlocking the door. Next week is July 4th. I want you to come to the celebration downtown with me. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about feeling wrong celebrating, and I realized that for 50 years, I've been giving the war power over my joy. I've let my guilt about surviving keep me from living the kind of life Sergeant Hayes and the others would have wanted for me. Grandpa, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Neither am I, he admitted. But that's why we need to do it together. We'll honor our brothers by being present, by choosing to live fully despite the pain. That's the real victory, Tommy. Not the wars we survived, but the lives we build afterward. July 4th arrived with typical Virginia summer intensity, the temperature climbing into the low 90s by mid-morning, humidity making the air feel thick enough to swim through. Robert and I met at his house early, before the crowds gathered downtown, both of us wearing simple polo shirts and jeans, nothing that would draw attention or mark us as veterans. The drive into downtown Richmond was quiet, classic rock playing softly on the radio, neither of us ready to break the contemplative silence. I kept thinking about Rodriguez and Jackson, wondering what they'd think about me being here, whether they'd understand or feel betrayed. But then I remembered what David Sullivan had said about honoring sacrifice through living, and I tried to let the guilt flow through me, rather than drowning in it. Monument Avenue was already lined with families setting up lawn chairs and blankets, kids running around with small American flags, the smell of sunscreen and hot dogs mixing in the summer air. We found parking a few blocks away and walked toward the main staging area where the parade would begin. I haven't done this since 1967, Robert said, his voice barely audible over the growing crowd noise. The year before I deployed, everything seemed simpler then, more black and white. Good guys and bad guys, clear missions, certain outcomes. The war taught me nothing is ever that simple. We found a spot near a family with 3 young children, the youngest barely old enough to walk, toddling around on unsteady legs, while her older siblings practiced their flag-waving techniques. The mother, a woman about my age, smiled at us apologetically when the toddler stumbled in our direction. Sorry, she's still learning coordination, the mother said, scooping up her daughter. No problem at all, Robert replied, his face softening in a way I'd rarely seen. I remember when my grandson was that age. Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago at the same time. The parade began with a high school marching band. their instruments gleaming in the sunlight, playing patriotic songs with the earnest enthusiasm of teenagers. Behind them came the color guard, veterans from the local VFW post, carrying flags with precision and dignity. Robert stood straighter when they passed, his hand moving instinctively to his heart. Then came the active duty military units, current soldiers, sailors, and Marines marching in formation, their uniforms pressed and perfect. I felt a tug of recognition, remembering what it felt like to march in dress blues, the pride of wearing the uniform, the weight of everything it represented. But it was the next section that made Robert's breath catch. Veterans from different eras rode in classic cars and on parade floats, waving to the crowd. A group of World War II veterans, now in their late 90s, barely a dozen left from the thousands who'd once marched these streets. Korea veterans followed, then Vietnam veterans, their float decorated with images of the wall in Washington, names upon names of those who never came home. "There's Marcus," Robert said suddenly, pointing to a black man in his 70s sitting on the Vietnam float, wearing a cap that identified him as a radio operator. I didn't know he'd be here. Before I could respond, Robert was moving through the crowd toward the street, waving to get Marcus's attention. The parade had slowed for the crowds and Marcus spotted him, his face breaking into a wide smile of recognition. The float stopped and Marcus climbed down, the two men embracing like the brothers they were. "Robert Hayes, I'll be damned," Marcus said, stepping back to look at my grandfather properly. "How many years has it been?" "Too many," Robert admitted. "This is my grandson, Thomas. He just finished his service with the Marines." Marcus shook my hand with a grip that was still strong despite his age. "Afghanistan?" "Yes, sir." "Welcome home, son, and thank you for your service." He said it differently than civilians did, with an understanding of what those words actually meant, what they encompassed. The parade marshal was signaling for Marcus to return to the float, but he lingered a moment longer. "We're having a platoon reunion next month in DC, visiting the wall. You should come, Robert. Bring your grandson. It's time." Robert nodded and I could see tears forming in his eyes, something I'd never witnessed before. "I'll be there." As the parade continued, we returned to our spot, but something had shifted. The family beside us had noticed the exchange, and the mother approached with her eldest daughter, maybe 7 or 8 years old. "Excuse me," she said gently. "My daughter wanted to say something to you." The little girl stepped forward, nervous but determined, holding out a small American flag. "Thank you for protecting our country," she said to Robert, then turned to me. "And thank you too." Robert knelt down with some difficulty, his knees not what they used to be, and accepted the flag with solemnity that matched the moment. "Thank you, young lady. You remind me why we serve, to make sure kids like you can grow up safe and free." The girl smiled and ran back to her mother, mission accomplished, unaware of the profound impact her simple gesture had made. Robert stood slowly, holding the flag carefully, and I saw decades of pain and guilt begin to crack, letting in light he'd kept locked out for 50 years. The rest of the parade passed in a blur of marching bands, local organizations, and community groups. When it ended, the crowd began to disperse toward the riverfront, where the evening fireworks would be held. Robert and I walked slowly, letting the families with young children pass us, content to take our time. "You know what Sergeant Hayes told me the night before he died?" Robert said suddenly. "We were on watch together, smoking cigarettes even though we weren't supposed to. He said that if anything happened to him, he wanted us to promise we'd go home and really live. Not just survive, but truly live. Have families, build careers, laugh at stupid jokes, eat good food, love deeply. He said that would be the real way to honor his sacrifice, not by building monuments or having parades, but by living the lives he couldn't." "Did you do that?" I asked. "Did you really live?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I tried. I married your grandmother, raised your daddy, loved you with everything I had, but I also spent 50 years hiding from joy, afraid that celebrating life somehow meant forgetting the men who died. I see now that was wrong. The best way to honor them is to live so fully that our lives justify their sacrifice." We reached his truck as the first vendors were setting up for the evening festivities. The temperature had dropped slightly with the approaching dusk, and a breeze carried the smell of the James River toward us. "I'm going to that reunion next month," Robert said, unlocking the doors. "I'm going to stand at the wall and I'm going to tell Sergeant Hayes that I'm sorry it took me 50 years to learn how to really live, and I'm going to promise him that I'll spend however many years I have left making up for lost time." "Can I come with you?" I asked. "I was counting on it, Tommy." You need to meet the men who shaped who I am, and you need to start building your own peace with Rodriguez and Jackson. The sooner you start, the less time you'll lose to guilt and grief." We drove home as the sun set behind us, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The radio played quietly, and for the first time since coming home from deployment, I felt something like peace settling over me. Not the absence of pain, but the acceptance of it. The understanding that carrying the memory of fallen brothers was a weight I could bear without letting it crush the joy from my life. That night, as fireworks exploded over the James River visible from Robert's backyard, we sat together on the porch, the same place this journey had begun months ago. The colors reflected in the clouds, temporary and beautiful, celebrating a freedom purchased with blood and sacrifice across generations. "Next year," Robert said, watching a particularly bright burst of red and gold, "we'll invite the whole group from the VA, Carol, Leonard, David, all of them. We'll make it a tradition, veterans and their families celebrating together, honoring those who didn't make it home by living the lives they died to protect." "That sounds perfect, Grandpa. And Tommy, thank you for coming to find me, for asking the questions I needed to answer. You gave me something I didn't even know I'd lost, the permission to be both grateful for surviving and heartbroken for those who didn't. Both things can be true at once." The fireworks continued, each explosion a temporary monument to light against darkness, noise against silence, celebration against sorrow. And in that moment, sitting beside my grandfather, I understood why he'd never celebrated Victory Day. It wasn't the victory that needed celebrating, it was the peace that followed, hard-won and fragile, built on the sacrifices of men like Sergeant Hayes, Rodriguez, Jackson, and countless others whose names were etched on walls and headstones across the nation. We didn't win wars, we survived them. And the real victory was in choosing to live fully afterward, to honor the fallen not through silence and withdrawal, but through joy and connection and the stubborn insistence that their sacrifices would not be in vain. As the final firework burst across the sky, brilliant white against the darkness, Robert raised his coffee mug in a quiet toast. "To Sergeant William Hayes," he said softly, "it took me 50 years, but I finally understand what you meant. I'm going to really live now, old friend, for both of us." I raised my own mug, thinking of Rodriguez and Jackson, of the weight I'd been carrying, and the peace I was learning to make with survival. "To all of them," I added, "to really living." The last echoes of the fireworks faded into the summer night, but the promise we'd made lingered, solid and real, a foundation for the years ahead. My grandfather had spent 5 decades learning how to honor the dead by embracing life. I had the advantage of his wisdom, his mistakes, his hard-won understanding. I wouldn't waste the gift he'd given me. The celebration ended, but the real victory, the one that mattered, was just beginning.